24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at the moment. India summons the Canadian Deputy High Commissioner with regard to the raising of separatist slogans on Khalistan at an event which was being personally addressed by the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The United States and the United Kingdom have urged Hamas to accept an Israeli proposal for a truce in the Gaza war and the release of some hostages. Meanwhile, pro-Palestinian protests have spread on campuses from the United States to the United Kingdom and France, showing solidarity with Palestinians and demanding action over Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Thousands of people take the streets across Australia, calling for greater action on a growing epidemic of women killed in violent attacks. Sri Lanka travel will cost half now as ferry services are expected to resume from the 13th of May. The travel between our countries is expected to cost close to 50% less than the airfare. Well, our big focus, the Ministry of External Affairs has summoned the Canadian Deputy High Commissioner and lodged a strong protest after pro-Khalistan slogans were raised at a public meeting attended by the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now, at this event attended by Mr. Trudeau, he was heard saying that the Canadian government will support the right to religion of the Sikh community in his country without discrimination. The government of India's deep concern and strong protest was conveyed at such disturbing actions being allowed to continue unchecked at the event. This is what the MEA has said, adding that this illustrates once again the political space that has been given in Canada to separatism, extremism and violence. Maha Siddiqui is in Vancouver. She joins us with further details.
After a brief period of quiet between India and Canada, the issue of Khalistan has once again resurfaced in the public discourse between the two countries. The Ministry of External Affairs summoned the Canadian Deputy High Commissioner to lodge a protest over the raising of pro-Khalistan slogans in the presence of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau at a Khalsa Day event in Toronto. The Ministry of External Affairs said that it was concerned over such moves going unchecked and that it provided evidence once again to the kind of political space that has been provided to violence, extremism and separatism. Last year at a parade in Canada, a float depicting Indira Gandhi's assassination was also included. Now, the issue of Khalistan has been a sore point, a point of friction between the Trudeau government and the Modi government for over 6 years now. India says that Canada has not done enough to clamp down on Khalistani extremists. In fact, it believes that because there is a sizable number of Sikh population in some ridings or constituencies in Canada and that it is of political importance to the Trudeau government and Trudeau's party, therefore it doesn't act against the extremism. On the other hand, the Canadian side believes that there are two sets of Khalistanis, one which are the activists and who they believe have the right to express their views. On the other side, there are those who are extremists against whom they are willing to take action while they keep an eye on the activists, that is the Khalistani activists. But India believes that not much has been done in this context. Also because there have been slogans that have been violent in nature. There have been posters that have been put up that clearly had called for violent acts against some of the Indian diplomats that had created grave friction last year, to which Canada had responded by saying that it will act and provide safety to the Indian diplomats, and such incidents or such posters or threats to diplomats is something that is unacceptable to it. But the issue took a different turn last year itself when the Prime Minister, that is Justin Trudeau, got up in Parliament and made an allegation against India for having had a hand in the killing of a Khalistani extremist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was killed in Surrey in British Columbia in June last year. This resulted in a major friction between the two sides, with the Canadian side expelling an Indian diplomat, and then in a tit-for-tat, India expelling one diplomat, after which India revoked the diplomatic immunity of 41 other diplomats on the Canadian side, who then later returned to Canada.
Well, as my colleague Maha Siddiqui is reporting, the MEA in a press release has cautioned that their continued expressions not only impact India-Canada relations, but also encourage a climate of violence and criminality in Canada to the detriment of its own citizens. Now, joining us for further clarity into the matter, former diplomat Prabhu Dayal. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us. Sir, India has cautioned that this illustrates once again the political space that has been given in Canada to separatism, extremism and violence.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. Canada has become a hotbed for anti-India activities by extremist Sikhs who are funded by Pakistan's intelligence service, the ISI. Now, these extremist Sikhs are openly calling for the breakup of India and the creation of Khalistan. They have in the past attacked the Indian High Commission in Ottawa, and they have also put up posters calling for the assassination of Indian diplomats, including the Indian High Commissioner in Canada. Moreover, as we know, these extremists have also issued threats to the Hindu community in Canada. Now, Justin Trudeau's government has allowed all these anti-India activities to be carried out by the Khalistan supporters because he is indulging in vote bank politics. You know, Justin Trudeau heads a minority government. He has 160 seats in the Canadian Parliament, while he needs 170 at least. So he needs outside support. And he has got this support from the anti-India, pro-Khalistan activist, Jagmeet Singh Dhaliwal, whose party, the New Democratic Party, has 25 seats. So the actions of the pro-Khalistan elements have started to impact India-Canada relations. And they are also encouraging a climate of violence and criminality in Canada to the detriment of its own citizens. It is in this background that we should see these recent events. Yesterday, India summoned the Canadian Deputy High Commissioner to convey strong objections to the chanting of pro-Khalistan slogans at an event in Toronto, which was attended by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now, the slogan chanting at the gathering was really disturbing, and it showcased the ongoing atmosphere of anti-India separatism, extremism, and violence within Canada's political space. Now, I was listening to the comments of Maha Siddiqui from Canada, and she rightly pointed out that the anti-India activities of the pro-Khalistan activists are going on without checks. And that, for example, on 4th June last year, these radical Sikhs held a parade in Brampton, glorifying the assassination of Indira Gandhi. And the Brampton demonstration had a tableau of Indira Gandhi with blood on her clothes and a poster that read, "Revenge of attack on Sri Darbar Sahib." So all this is greatly damaging India's relations with Canada, as it has to.
Indeed, sir.
And
but you touched upon the crucial aspect of vote bank politics. There isn't any denying the fact that there is vote bank politics that's playing in the fray. But at the same time, it wasn't just Justin Trudeau. After Trudeau gave his address, when we're talking about this specific incident, the opposition Conservative Party leader, Pierre Poilievre, his speech was also preceded by Khalistan Zindabad slogans from the audience. So it's not just Trudeau in a sense.
Right.
It's the political atmosphere in Canada, right?
Well, it is true that the political atmosphere is such that both parties perhaps think that they need the support of the Sikh community, and including the radical Sikhs. the Sikh population, I understand, in Canada is about 2% of the total population, and 2% is a sizable number. But this is impacting the kind of atmosphere which is prevailing in their country, and naturally, in turn, it is impacting India's relations with Canada.
Right. Also, sir, in the past, we've seen India has urged Canada to reduce the scale of its diplomatic presence within India. In such a case, is India likely to ask Canada to further downsize its presence here?
Well, I think some steps will be taken, but India had asked Canada to downsize its mission for various reasons. Firstly, the size of the Canadian mission was much bigger than the size of the Indian mission in Canada. Then again, we had clear indications that a lot of the diplomats in the Canadian High Commission here in India were indulging in anti-India activities. They were in touch with the pro-Khalistan elements, and they were trying to foster a very negative sort of activity. So it had become necessary to ask Canada to downsize its mission. Now, if the relations worsen, then perhaps there could be some more steps taken to check things, because our fear is that Canada is playing a mischievous role in regard to our bilateral relations.
Well, India asserts that disturbing actions went unchecked as far as this event is concerned. Thank you so much, Mr. Dayal, for joining us, as always, and making time for us on The World 24/7.
Thank you.
Well, the US Secretary of State has said that the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas, ahead of what are seen as last chance talks to salvage a diplomatic solution before a threatened Israeli ground invasion in Rafah. Speaking at a World Economic Forum meeting in Saudi Arabia, Antony Blinken said Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. These are the words of Mr. Blinken. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly. I'm hopeful they will make the right decision. This is what he has said. Meanwhile, the UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron told the same gathering that Hamas should accept the deal for a sustained 40-day ceasefire. As you know, international actors have renewed efforts to broker a ceasefire in the nearly 7-month-old war in recent days. Israel's mounting preparations for a ground operation in Rafah, where more than half of Gaza's 2.3 million population has sought shelter from the fighting elsewhere, mean that this week's talks in Cairo may be the last opportunity for negotiations to free Israeli hostages and pause or end the war. Here's what the White House press secretary had to say.
In recent days, there has been new progress in talks, and currently the onus is indeed on Hamas. There is a deal on the table, and they need to take it. We believe that all efforts need to be brought to bear to convince Hamas to accept the proposal immediately. It is a priority to get those hostages home. It is a priority to get to a ceasefire, and is obviously a priority to get that all-important humanitarian aid into Gaza.
Meanwhile, Israel is greatly concerned that the International Criminal Court may issue arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu, the defense minister, and senior military officials as early as this week. The court launched an investigation 3 years ago into possible war crimes committed by both Israel and Palestinian militants, going back to the Israel-Hamas war in 2014. It has given no public indication that the arrest warrants are imminent, and it was not clear whether Israel was also expecting arrest warrants for any Hamas leaders. But what does this mean for the Israeli Prime Minister? Well, any warrants would not mean that Netanyahu will end up in jail. Neither Israel nor the United States actually recognize the court's jurisdiction, though any warrants would actually put Israeli officials at risk of arrest in other countries that actually include much of Europe. They would also serve as a high-profile statement on Israel's actions in Gaza, and an embarrassing development, frankly, that would put Netanyahu alongside Russian President Vladimir Putin as a major leader to face such action from the ICC.
Troubles are mounting for Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as the leader could now be facing arrest warrants from the International Criminal Court on various charges linked to the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. According to reports, Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Chief of Israel's Defense Forces could face arrest in roughly 129 countries. In the nearly 7-month-long war, Netanyahu has faced international backlash for Tel Aviv's response to the October 7 attacks, as well as accused of preventing the delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Responding to a possible ICC arrest warrant, Netanyahu threatened that such intervention would set a dangerous precedent. Taking to X, Netanyahu rebuked, "Under my leadership, Israel will never accept any attempt by the ICC to undermine its inherent right of self-defense. While the ICC will not affect Israel's actions, it would set a dangerous precedent that threatens the soldiers and officials of all democracies fighting savage terrorism and wanton aggression." Speculation over his arrest comes days after Netanyahu set a date for a military offensive into Rafah in southern Gaza, the last space of refuge for over 1 million Palestinians remaining in the Gaza Strip, with tent camps set up in Khan Yunis. An impending IDF operation into Rafah has garnered immense global criticism. Even at home, Netanyahu continues to face public dissatisfaction over his inaction to bring back the 133 hostages that remain in Hamas's captivity after more than 200 days since the war first erupted, with many protesters continuing to demand for his resignation. NDTV Bureau Report.
Well, this as the United States found 5 units of Israel's security forces responsible for gross violations of human rights. The first time Washington has reached such a conclusion about Israeli forces. This is what the State Department has said, though it has not barred any of the units from receiving US military assistance. That's crucial to note. Israel has conducted remediation in the cases of 4 of the units in compliance with US law prohibiting military assistance to security force units that commit such abuses and have not been brought to justice, State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel told reporters. The incidents in question took place outside of Gaza before this war broke out between Israel and Hamas in October. This is what Mr. Patel has said. Listen in.
After a careful process, we found 5 Israeli units responsible for individual incidents of gross violations of human rights. All of these were incidents much before October 7th, and none took place in Gaza. 4 of these units have effectively remediated these violations, which is what we expect partners to do.
And protests in US campuses have ballooned, spreading to Europe and Australia now. They come just as the world appeared to have got used to the strikes on Palestine and now appear to signal a significant shift in how we accustom ourselves to wars. Students have called to divest from weapon manufacturers who benefit Israel, and an overhaul of Joe Biden's policies with Israel at a time when polls spell a lack of enthusiasm for the sitting president and his opponent too, by the way. Meanwhile, university authorities have escalated pressure, invited law enforcement officials inside, prompted them to arrest students. Ad hoc assured the US Congress that professors supporting them will be removed, and turned campus spaces against the very students they are supposed to hold. Videos that you see on your screens of extraordinary violence by US police officers against students and teachers have flooded social media, as have those showing aged professors standing guard. Meanwhile, hundreds took to the streets of Tel Aviv during the last day of the Passover holiday, demanding a ceasefire deal and the immediate release of the hostages kept in captivity by the Hamas in Gaza. Giant letters were displayed on the street with a message to the Israeli government reading, "Rafah can wait, hostages cannot," while protesters set fire to objects, blocking some of the streets in the coastal city, where demonstrations demanding a deal to bring the 133 hostages back have been taking place almost daily in the last few weeks.
There is no time anymore, and there is no time for more war. We don't want another war. Another war in Rafah will not bring the hostage. We want them back now in a deal, just in a deal.
I think the leaders on both sides, both Hamas and also our leaders, they are dragging us all to hell. We are in hell now. It's hell in Gaza. It's bad for the hostages. They are in hell, and we want to stop it. And a hostage deal is possible. Hamas should also go forward and make a deal. Aren't they sick of what happens to their people?
Well, let's turn our attention now to Australia, where violence against women is an epidemic. This is what Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said as thousands attended rallies in Sydney, as well as other major Australian cities, urging tougher laws on gendered violence. The rallies were spurred by a wave of violence against women that the government says has seen a woman killed every 4 days this year. The rallies also followed a mass stabbing in Sydney this month that killed 6 people, including 5 women. And by the way, you know, gender-based violence is an ongoing issue in Australia, a nation of 26 million. Back in 2021, tens of thousands rallied over allegations of sexual abuse and misconduct in some of the nation's highest political offices. Protesters are now demanding stronger criminal laws, and similar protests were scheduled, across Australia in Perth, Melbourne, Victoria, Tasmania, as well as Brisbane.
Thousands of people have rallied across Australia demanding action to end gender-based violence in the country as anger grows over the rising number of women killed in violent attacks this year. So far this year, 1 woman has been killed every 4 days in Australia, with 27 women killed in the first 119 days of this year, according to an Australian campaign group. Massive protests across the country, from Sydney to Melbourne, are now calling for greater action, including calls for a royal commission to address the epidemic of violence against women. The Australian Prime Minister joined these national rallies over the weekend, calling the situation in the country a national crisis.
We're here today to demand that governments of all levels must do better, including my own, including every state and territory government. We're here as well to say that society and Australia must do better. We need to change the culture, we need to change attitudes. We need to change the legal system. We need to change the approach by all governments. Because it's not enough to support victims. We need to focus on the perpetrators and focus on prevention.
This is not the first time Australians have protested demanding for better legislation to protect women. In 2021, marches took place across the country over allegations of sexual misconduct within the parliament. These latest protests come weeks after 5 women were stabbed at a shopping centre earlier this month, with mall footage revealing that the accused deliberately targeted women in the assault. Chants of "No more, we want action and do your job" echoed throughout Australia as men and women gathered at over 17 rallies over the weekend, with roughly 15,000 people protesting in the city of Melbourne. Demonstrators say state and federal governments need to cooperate on a plan of action to curb this epidemic against women. As Australians call for tougher laws to tackle gender-based violence, it remains to be seen whether the protests would lead to real change in the country. Vidisha Bagchi, Bureau Report, NDTV.
The biggest carnival of democracy, India's general election.
Prime Minister Modi makes a formidable bid for a hat-trick.
The opposition is trying to mount a united challenge.
And the southern parties are standing their ground.
As battle lines are drawn,
join us on an exciting journey on the road to 2024.
Indian elections, a festival like no other.
And NDTV covers elections like no other.
When India votes, you can count on us.
यत्र तत्र सर्वत्र वेगवान महाराष्ट्र NDTV मराठी.
I pledge to vote. This is the only relationship between those who govern and those who are governed. It is the only way to hold or reward people or penalize them on the governance they have given. It is a centerpiece of our democratic architecture. We have a right.
Welcome back. After a long hiatus, the passenger ferry service between Tamil Nadu and northern Sri Lanka is set to restart yet again. The passenger ferry service will recommence on the 13th of May between Nagapattinam port in Tamil Nadu and the northern Sri Lankan port of Kankesathurai. The distance between these ports is approximately 64 nautical miles with a travel time of around 4 hours. But the travel between our countries is expected to cost close to 50% less than air travel. And finally, time marches on and all good things must come to an end. But don't tell that to the Rolling Stones. What many believe to be the greatest rock and roll band in the world showed no signs of slowing down anytime soon as they kicked off their latest tour at Houston's NRG Stadium. Well, thanks for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest developments for you. Do stay tuned.